A violent storm tears through a quiet suburb on the night of October 12th. Hurricane-force winds rip trees from the ground. Power lines snap. Darkness swallows the neighborhood whole. When dawn breaks and the winds finally die, a man is missing. Jack McDonald, 68 years old, vanished from his locked home, his wallet sitting on the kitchen table, his keys beside it, his phone still charging by the bed, his car in the garage. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no logical explanation. Search teams comb the woods for 5 days. K-9 units find nothing. Thermal drones detect no trace. Volunteers walk grid patterns through miles of forest. And then, on day 5, a detective stands alone in Jack's empty house and hears something impossible. A faint tapping sound, coming from beneath the floorboards. Jack McDonald had lived in Cedar Creek for 43 years. The same house, the same street, the same morning routine that his neighbors could set their watches by. 6:30 a.m., coffee on the front porch, regardless of weather. 7:15, tending the garden beds he'd built himself, raised boxes constructed with mortise and tenon joints that would outlast the house. 8 o'clock, workshop time in the garage, where he restored antique furniture for clients who found him through word of mouth alone. He was a man of precision, a retired carpenter who'd spent 35 years building custom homes before his knees finally forced him into retirement. His hands bore the scars of his trade, calluses that never fully faded, a missing fingertip on his left hand from a table saw accident in 1987, burn marks from soldering work. His wife Margaret had died 5 years earlier. Stroke, sudden and complete. After that, Jack became quieter, more withdrawn, but his routine never wavered. His daughter Sarah lived 2 hours away in the city. They spoke every Sunday at 3 p.m. She worried about him, living alone in that big house, especially as he approached 70. She'd suggested assisted living twice. Both times, Jack had shut down the conversation with the same response. "I built half this neighborhood. I'm not leaving the only home I've ever known." The neighbors knew him as polite but distant. He'd wave from his porch. He'd help retrieve a trash can blown into the street. But he rarely accepted invitations to block parties or holiday gatherings. "Jack keeps to himself," was the phrase most commonly used to describe him. His only constant companion was Buster, a 12-year-old mixed breed he'd adopted from the shelter the year after Margaret died. The dog followed him everywhere, from workshop to garden to porch. When you saw Jack, you saw Buster. The house itself reflected its owner. A 1970s split level that Jack had renovated extensively over the decades. He'd rebuilt the deck, refinished the hardwood floors, replaced every window with double-pane glass he'd installed himself. The basement had been converted into additional workshop space, walls lined with tools organized by size and function. He knew every beam, every joint, every inch of foundation. He told Sarah once, during one of their Sunday calls, "I could navigate this house blindfolded. I know where every nail is." It was the kind of statement that seemed unremarkable at the time. Later, it would take on a different weight. Cedar Creek itself was the kind of suburb that existed in pockets across America. Quiet streets, large lots separated by mature trees, families who'd lived there for generations, mixed with younger couples seeking space and safety. Crime was nearly non-existent. The most exciting thing that had happened in the past year was a black bear spotted near the elementary school. Properties were spaced far enough apart that you had privacy, close enough that you still felt like part of a community. Most homes sat on half-acre lots, with woods encroaching at the edges. Jack's house occupied the corner lot at the end of Maple Drive. Woods on 2 sides. A retired dentist named Howard to his left. A young family with 3 children across the street. It was Howard who'd later tell investigators that Jack was the most predictable man I've ever known. You could tell the day of the week by what Jack was doing, Howard said. Mondays he mowed. Wednesdays he ran errands. Saturdays he worked in the shop with the door open. You'd hear the saw running, smell the sawdust, like clockwork. This was the life Jack had built for himself after Margaret's death. Ordered, controlled, solitary, but not lonely. A life where deviation from routine would be immediately noticeable, which is why, when he disappeared, everyone knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. The National Weather Service issued the alert at 4:47 p.m. on October the 12th. Severe thunderstorm warning. Winds in excess of 70 miles per hour expected. Potential for widespread damage and extended power outages. A derecho was coming. Most Cedar Creek residents had never heard the term. A derecho, a widespread, long-lived windstorm associated with a band of rapidly moving showers or thunderstorms. Not a tornado, not a hurricane, something in between. A wall of wind that could flatten everything in its path. By 6 p.m., the sky had turned a sickly greenish gray. By 7 p.m., the temperature had dropped 15 degrees. By 8 p.m., the storm hit. It came not as rain first, but as wind. A sustained roar that sounded like a freight train, bearing down on the neighborhood. Trees that had stood for 50 years bent horizontal. Branches snapped with sounds like gunshots. A trampoline from 3 streets over sailed through the air and wrapped itself around a telephone pole. The power went out at 8:14 p.m. Cedar Creek plunged into darkness. Rain followed the wind, sheets of it, falling sideways, turning streets into rivers within minutes. Lightning strobed constantly, offering brief, harsh glimpses of the chaos. A massive oak in Howard's front yard split down the middle, half of it crashing across his driveway, missing his car by inches. The Hendersons across the street, huddled in their basement bathroom with their 3 children, listening to their roof shed shingles like playing cards. No one was outside. No one could be outside. The storm was total, consuming. The kind of event that makes you realize how thin the veneer of civilization really is. It lasted 90 minutes. By 9:45 p.m., the wind had dropped to a steady blow. By 10:30 p.m., the rain had become a drizzle. By midnight, it was over. Cedar Creek sat in darkness and silence. Debris covered every street. Power lines lay across roads like dead snakes. The air smelled of ozone and torn vegetation. Without streetlights, without porch lights, without any lights at all, the neighborhood existed in a blackness most residents had never experienced. Cell service was spotty. Landlines were dead. The few people who ventured outside with flashlights did so carefully, picking their way around downed branches and standing water. Howard checked his property with a camping lantern, surveying the fallen oak with a mixture of shock and gratitude. The Hendersons discovered their fence had been torn completely away. The young couple 2 houses down found their garage door crumpled like aluminum foil. No one thought to check on Jack McDonald. Not that night. His lights were out like everyone else's. His house sat dark and silent at the end of the street, barely visible through the trees. In the chaos of the aftermath, in the scramble to check your own damage and ensure your own family's safety, Jack simply wasn't a priority. He was predictable, self-sufficient, the kind of man who could handle himself. Besides, in the darkness, in the wreckage, it was impossible to see much of anything beyond your own property line. The next day, Wednesday the 13th, dawned gray and humid. The power was still out. Utility. Crews were working through the county, but Cedar Creek wasn't a priority. No injuries reported, no fires, just downed lines and property damage. Neighbors emerged in daylight to assess the full scope of the destruction. Chainsaws buzzed as people cut up fallen trees. A few residents with generators ran extension cords to their neighbors' refrigerators. The street became a temporary community, people sharing supplies and stories. By Thursday, the power was back on. By Friday morning, most of the immediate debris had been cleared. Life was returning to normal. And that's when Sarah McDonald called the Cedar Creek Police Department to report that her father was missing. The call came into the Cedar Creek Police Department at 2:47 p.m. on October the 14th. Sarah McDonald, 42, hadn't been able to reach her father in 2 days. She'd tried his landline 17 times. His cell phone, when she called it, rang and rang from somewhere inside the house. She could hear it through the front door when she stood on the porch, but no one answered. A neighbor, Tom Brennan, agreed to check. He had a spare key Jack had given him years ago for emergencies. He let himself in through the front door. What he found made him call the police immediately. The house wasn't ransacked. There were no signs of violence, no indication of forced entry or a struggle. Everything was exactly where it should be, except for the man who lived there. When Officer Lisa Chen arrived at 3:12 p.m., Brennan walked her through what he'd seen. The front door had actually been unlocked when he tried it. He hadn't needed the key. Inside, the living room was tidy. Mail sat in a neat stack on the side table. The television was off. In the kitchen, a ceramic mug sat on the counter next to the sink. Chen touched the outside with the back of her hand. Cold. The coffee inside had a thin film on its surface. At least a day old. Possibly 2. A spoon rested on the counter beside it. The hall table held Jack's wallet, his keyring with the Ford emblem, and his cell phone. Chen pulled on latex gloves and opened the wallet. Driver's license, credit cards, $73 in cash. Nothing missing. The phone's battery was dead. His reading glasses were folded on the arm of the recliner in the living room, resting on top of a woodworking magazine open to an article about dovetail joints. Chen moved through the house methodically. The bedroom showed no signs of disturbance. The bed was made, military corners. Clothes hung in the closet organized by type and color. The bathroom revealed a damp towel hanging on the rack. Chen touched it, still slightly moist. A toothbrush sat in the holder. The medicine cabinet contained the typical inventory of an older man living alone. Blood pressure, medication, reading glasses in 2 different strengths, dental floss, antacids. Back downstairs, Chen opened the door to the garage. Jack's 2015 Ford F-150 sat in its usual spot. She placed her hand on the hood. Cold. She checked the odometer through the window. 87,432 miles. She photographed it. What she didn't find anywhere in the house was Jack McDonald, or his dog, Buster. The back door was locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged. Every window was closed and latched. Chen checked them all, personally, testing each lock. The basement door off the kitchen led down to a concrete-floored space filled with woodworking equipment, table saw, drill press, workbench cluttered with hand tools. Everything covered in a fine layer of sawdust that showed no footprints. The space smelled of wood shavings and machine oil. By 4:30 p.m., Detective Marcus Webb had arrived. He stood in the kitchen, looking at the coffee cup, the wallet, the keys. "When's the last confirmed sighting?" he asked. Chen checked her notes. October 11th, evening. Neighbor across the street saw him bringing in patio furniture before the storm hit. Around 6 p.m., Webb looked around the kitchen. Everything was clean, orderly. A dish towel hung perfectly straight on the oven handle. The refrigerator hummed. No signs of forced entry? None. No tool marks on the locks. No damage to the door frames or windows. Back door was locked from inside. Front door was unlocked when the neighbor arrived, but he says Jack sometimes left it unlocked during the day. Sometimes, Webb repeated. He walked to the hall table and looked at the wallet without touching it. But he never left without this. Sarah MacDonald arrived at 5:03 p.m. She stood in her father's living room, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the reading glasses on the chair arm. "He wouldn't leave those," she said. "He can't read without them. He has 3 pairs because he's always losing them, but he wouldn't just leave." Webb asked her to walk through the house and identify anything out of place, anything unusual. She moved slowly through each room, touching nothing, just looking. In the kitchen, she stopped at the coffee cup. That's his favorite mug. He uses it every morning. She leaned closer without touching it. He always finishes his coffee. Always. He'd make a cup, drink the whole thing, then rinse it and put it in the dishwasher immediately. He never left dishes sitting out. "What about the dog?" Webb asked. "Buster. He's a border collie, 10 years old. My dad's had him since he was a puppy. Takes him everywhere." She looked around. His leash is gone. Usually hangs on that hook by the back door. Chen checked. The hook was empty. "So he might have taken the dog for a walk," Chen offered. Sarah shook her head. "In that storm? No, my dad is careful. He wouldn't take Buster out in dangerous weather. And even if he did, why would he leave his phone? He always takes his phone when he walks Buster in case of emergency." Webb opened cabinets, checked the pantry. "Does he keep a go bag? Emergency supplies?" "Not that I know of. He's not really the prepper type. I mean, he was a carpenter. He's practical, prepared, but not paranoid." "Any health issues that might cause confusion? Dementia, early Alzheimer's?" "No, he's sharp. Sharper than I am half the time." She paused. "He has high blood pressure, takes medication for it, but he's never had any cognitive problems." Webb made notes. "Any conflicts? Arguments with neighbors? Disputes? Anyone who might have a grudge?" "No. Everyone loves my dad. He fixes things for people, helps out. He's lived here 23 years. He's part of the neighborhood." "Financial problems?" "No. He's retired but comfortable. Gets his pension, Social Security. He's not wealthy, but he's stable." Webb looked at Chen, then back at Sarah. "Is there any reason your father would want to disappear?" Sarah's face hardened. "No, absolutely not. My dad wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do that to me, to his grandson. We talk 3 times a week. He was planning to come to my son's birthday party next month. He already bought the present. It's in his closet upstairs, wrapped and everything." Her voice cracked. "He didn't leave. Something happened to him." By 6:15 p.m., the house had been photographed, documented, and processed as a potential crime scene. Cedar Creek PD contacted the county sheriff's office to request search and rescue resources. At 7:30 p.m., as the last daylight faded, a K-9 unit arrived. The German Shepherd, a 6-year-old male named Rex, was given one of Jack's worn shirts from the laundry hamper. The dog pressed his nose to the fabric, then moved through the house, methodically working each room. In the kitchen, Rex paused at the back door. His handler, Officer Paul Timmons, watched carefully. The dog sniffed along the base of the door, then sat, the alert position. "He's got something," Timmons said. They opened the back door. Rex moved onto the small concrete patio, nose to the ground. He crossed the lawn, moving toward the back fence. At the gate, he paused again, sniffed, then continued into the alley behind the property. Timmons followed with a flashlight. The alley was gravel, lined with wooden fences and garage doors. Rex moved east, purposeful, following something. After 50 yards, he reached the intersection with Maple Street. There on the sidewalk, Rex circled twice, sniffed the concrete, then sat. "Trail ends here," Timmons called back. Webb came down the alley with Chen. "Ends?" "Yeah, it's like he got into a vehicle. They stood on the sidewalk in the dark, looking at the empty street. A streetlight buzzed overhead. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of a chainsaw, someone still cutting up fallen branches from the storm. He walked out his back door, through the alley, to the street, Webb said slowly. But he left his wallet, keys, and phone behind, didn't take his car, and took his dog. In the middle of a major storm, Chen added. Why? Webb said to no one in particular. No one had an answer. At first, light on October 15th, 73 hours after Jack McDonald was last seen, the search operation began in earnest. The Cedar Creek Volunteer Fire Department established a command post in the parking lot of Cedar Creek Elementary School, 2 blocks from Jack's house. By 7 a.m., 43 volunteers had gathered. Neighbors, co-workers from Jack's former carpentry business, members of the local VFW post, where Jack had been a regular. Sheriff's Deputy Angela Torres stood on the tailgate of a pickup truck and briefed the assembled searchers. She held up an enlarged photograph of Jack, a recent picture from Sarah's phone showing him at a backyard barbecue, smiling, wearing a blue polo shirt and his Rockies cap. Jack McDonald, 68 years old, white male, 5'10", 170 pounds, gray hair, blue eyes. Last seen the evening of October 11th. He may be accompanied by a border collie named Buster, black and white, 10 years old. She paused. Jack left behind his wallet, keys, phone, and vehicle. We don't know why he left his home or where he intended to go. He may be disoriented or injured. The volunteers were divided into teams of 4, each assigned a section of a grid that extended 2 miles in every direction from Jack's house. They were given radios, maps, and photographs. Their instructions were simple. Look everywhere. Check parks. Drainage ditches, wooded areas, abandoned buildings. Call out Jack's name. Watch for any sign of disturbance or recent passage. The first team headed east toward Cedar Creek Park. The second went north toward the commercial district. The third moved south into the greenbelt that ran along Willow Creek. The fourth headed west towards the older residential area with larger lots and denser vegetation. While the ground teams deployed, 2 specialized K-9 units from the county sheriff's office worked the immediate area around Jack's house. In addition to Rex, who had tracked to Maple Street the previous evening, a bloodhound named Sadie was brought in. Sadie was older, more experienced. She spent 20 minutes inside Jack's house, moving slowly through each room, her long ears dragging across the floor. When her handler, Deputy Frank Castillo, led her outside, she immediately moved to the back door, just as Rex had. But unlike Rex, Sadie didn't continue to the alley. She stopped on the patio, circled, then sat. "What's she telling you?" Torres asked. Castillo frowned. "She's conflicted. There's scent here, but it's not giving her a clear direction. Could mean he came back this way, or the scent pooled here for some reason. Wind patterns during the storm might have pushed it around. Can she track from a different starting point?" They tried the front door. Sadie nosed around the porch, moved down the walkway to the driveway, then stopped at the street. No alert, no clear trail. They tried the garage. Same result, interest, but no sustained track. "It's like he evaporated," Castillo said. By midday, the drone team arrived. 2 operators from the county's Emergency Services Division launched thermal imaging drones that could detect body heat through moderate tree cover. They flew a pattern covering a 4-square-mile area, the cameras scanning for the heat signature of a person or a large dog. The monitors showed the ghostly white shapes of deer, raccoons, a coyote. Several false alarms turned out to be homeless encampments or teenagers skipping school in the woods. No sign of Jack McDonald. At 2:30 p.m., the dive team entered Willow Creek at 3 locations. The creek had been swollen by the storm, running high and fast, carrying debris, branches, plastic bags, a bicycle frame. The divers worked methodically, moving upstream and down, probing dark water and checking snags where a body might have caught. They found a shopping cart, a waterlogged tent, and 6 months' worth of accumulated trash. No human remains. Webb stood on the bank watching the diver surface and descend. Surface and descend. Sarah McDonald stood beside him, arms folded, silent. If he went in during the storm, the current could have carried him miles downstream, Webb said carefully. He wouldn't have gone near the creek during a storm, Sarah replied. He wasn't stupid. I'm just trying to cover every possibility. Then cover the possibility that someone took him. Webb turned to look at her. There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of anything. That's the problem. She watched a diver disappear beneath the brown water. My father didn't wander off. Something happened. Someone made him leave. The door was unlocked. His things were inside. There's no sign of a struggle. Then they tricked him somehow, got him outside and grabbed him. With the dog? Sarah had no answer for that. She turned and walked back toward the command post. Webb's phone buzzed. Chen calling. Anything? He asked. Checked with all the local hospitals, within 50 miles. No John Does matching his description. No admissions or ER visits under his name. I also contacted animal control and every vet clinic in the county. No one's picked up a stray border collie. What about traffic cameras? Only 2 in Cedar Creek, both on Main Street. I pulled the footage from October 11th and 12th. Reviewed 12 hours so far. No sign of Jack's truck or anyone matching his description on foot. Keep looking. Marcus, I went back 3 days before the storm and I'm working forward. If he drove through those intersections, I'll find it. What about his phone records? Subpoena came through. Last activity was October 11th at 5:43 p.m. An outgoing call to Sarah that lasted 4 minutes. Before that, a call to the hardware store at 2:15 p.m. His location data shows him at home all day, October 11th. No movement after 6 p.m. So his phone stayed in the house, or turned off. But yeah, no tower pings after 6. Webb ended the call and looked at the map spread across the hood of his vehicle. Red pins marked areas already searched. Blue pins marked areas in progress. Yellow pins marked areas of interest, places the volunteers had flagged for follow-up. There were 8 yellow pins. Webb and Torres had personally checked all of them. One was a torn piece of fabric caught on a fence. Wrong color. Another was a disturbed patch of ground near the park. Turned out to be where someone had buried a dead cat. A third was drag marks leading into dense brush, made by a homeless man hauling a tarp full of aluminum cans. At 4:47 p.m., Team 3 radioed in. They'd found something in the greenbelt. Webb and Torres arrived 12 minutes later. The team leader, a retired firefighter named Don Phelps, led them down an overgrown trail to a clearing 30 yards from the creek. There, Phelps said, pointing. A blue tarp was spread on the ground beneath a cottonwood tree. On the tarp, a sleeping bag, 2 empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a paperback novel swollen with moisture. Torres photographed everything, then carefully lifted the edge of the tarp. Beneath it, the ground was compressed. Someone had been sleeping here recently. Homeless camp? Webb asked. Maybe, but look at this. Phelps moved to the base of the tree, carved into the bark, crude and fresh. Help. Torres felt a spike of adrenaline. Could be him. They searched the immediate area in expanding circles. Found more trash, a makeshift fire pit, a length of rope tied between 2 trees. No other signs of Jack. No dog prints. No indication of when the camp had been occupied or whether it was still active. Webb called for a forensics team. While they waited, Torres photographed the carved word from multiple angles. The cuts were clean, made with something sharp, a knife or a multi-tool. Jack was a carpenter, Torres said. He'd have carried a knife. So do a lot of people, Webb replied. But he was thinking the same thing. The forensics team arrived at dusk. They swabbed the water bottles for DNA, bagged the food wrappers, took soil samples. They cast an impression of a boot print found near the fire pit. Size 10, generic tread pattern that matched roughly 10,000 different work boot models. The DNA swabs would take weeks to process. The boot print might match Jack's size, or might not. Torres hadn't found his boots at the house, but hadn't thought to ask Sarah what size he wore. By 7 p.m., the light was failing. The ground search teams returned to the command post, exhausted and empty-handed. They'd covered 18 square miles on foot. They'd checked every park, every drainage culvert, every stand of trees large enough to conceal a person. They'd called Jack's name 10,000 times. Nothing. Torres updated the status board. Miles searched. 18. Volunteers, 43. Man-hours, 344. Leads, 1 pending lab results. That night, Sarah McDonald appeared on the local news. She stood on her father's front porch, the same porch where his coffee cup still sat inside on the kitchen counter, and spoke directly to the camera. If someone has my father, please let him go. He's 68 years old. He needs medication. He's not a threat to anyone. He's just a carpenter who fixed people's cabinets and helped his neighbors and loved his dog. Her voice broke. If you've seen him, if you know anything, please call the tip line. Please. We just want him home. The tip line received 47 calls that night. 23 were genuine attempts to help, reported sightings, suggestions of places to search. 18 were from psychics, mediums, and people claiming divine guidance. 6 were cruel prank calls. None of them led anywhere. On the morning of October 16th, day 5 of the search, the operation continued, but the tone had shifted. Volunteers still showed up, but fewer than the day before. The professional search teams remained, but the urgency had dimmed into something more mechanical, more procedural. Webb could feel it. The transition from rescue to recovery, from looking for a living man to looking for remains. At the morning briefing, Torres reviewed the status. We've now searched a 25 square mile area. Drones have covered 40 square miles. Dive teams have checked 3 miles of creek. K9 units have tracked every possible scent trail. We've interviewed 32 neighbors and associates. We've reviewed security camera footage from 17 locations. She didn't say what everyone was thinking. Where the hell is he? Webb stood. Today we expand the search radius to 5 miles. We recheck high-probability areas, parks, bodies of water, dense cover. We also start looking at unlikely scenarios, abandoned buildings, storm drains, culverts large enough for a person to enter. If Jack was disoriented, injured, or trying to find shelter during the storm, he might have ended up somewhere we wouldn't normally consider. The teams deployed, again. The search continued, but in the back of every searcher's mind was the same cold knowledge. 5 days without water is the edge of human survival. 5 days without food is manageable, but without water, the body shuts down. If Jack McDonald was alive out there somewhere, he was running out of time, if he wasn't already gone. By October 17, the search had entered its 5th day. The command post in Cedar Creek's municipal parking lot, which had buzzed with urgent radio chatter and the organized chaos of coordinated rescue operations, had thinned to a skeleton crew. The fleet of volunteer vehicles that once filled every available space had dwindled to a handful. The large-scale grid search, which had mobilized over 200 volunteers at its peak, was being officially scaled back. Detective Alan Miller stood at the incident board, studying the map covered in color-coded zones, each one representing a sector that had been systematically cleared. Green markers indicated areas searched by ground teams. Blue showed K-9 coverage. Red traced the thermal drone flight paths. Every inch within a 3-mile radius of Jack McDonald's home had been documented, photographed, analyzed. Nothing. The morning briefing was brief and somber. Search and rescue coordinator Beth Hansen addressed the remaining volunteers with the careful language of someone delivering news everyone already understood. "We're transitioning our focus," she said, which was professional code for an acknowledgement no one wanted to voice aloud. They were no longer looking for a man who could be saved. They were looking for remains. The statistics were working against them. After 5 days of exposure to October temperatures that had dropped into the low 40s at night, with no food, water, or shelter, survival became increasingly improbable, particularly for someone Jack's age. The medical emergency theory, which had dominated investigative thinking from day one, suggested a window that had likely already closed. The prevailing scenario went like this. During the chaos of the storm, Jack had suffered some kind of acute medical event, a stroke, cardiac incident, or diabetic episode. Disoriented and possibly experiencing altered mental status, he had wandered from his home into the darkness and wind. The storm's intensity would have made it impossible for neighbors to hear calls for help. The fallen trees and flooded creek beds had created dozens of places where someone confused and weakening could have taken shelter and simply not emerged. It was a theory supported by statistics. The National Institute of Health estimated that over 40% of adults Jack's age had some form of cardiovascular disease. Wandering behavior during medical emergencies was documented in case studies across the country. The pieces fit, but Detective Miller couldn't shake the inconsistencies. Jack's medications were still in the bathroom cabinet, each bottle carefully labeled in his precise handwriting, the daily organizer filled through the end of the month. His glucose monitor showed normal readings from the morning of October 12th. These weren't the patterns of someone in medical crisis. They were the patterns of someone who had planned to continue his routine indefinitely. The second theory gaining traction among investigators was darker. Opportunistic crime. The storm had knocked out power across the entire county. Street lights were dead. Security systems were offline. In that window of darkness and chaos, someone could have entered Jack's home, forced him to leave, and vanished into the confusion. The unlocked front door, so anomalous for a man who checked his locks obsessively, could support forced entry rather than voluntary exit. But this theory had its own problems. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no scuff marks, no blood. Jack's wallet contained $217 in cash, untouched. His wife's jewelry box remained in the master bedroom, undisturbed. If someone had entered with criminal intent, they had taken only one thing: Jack himself. And that led to questions no one wanted to fully articulate. Ransom? But 5 days had passed without contact. Targeted abduction? But Jack McDonald was a retired carpenter with a modest pension, no enemies anyone could identify, and a life so routine it barely intersected with potential threats. The third possibility, the one that surfaced in quiet conversations but never made it into official reports, was the simplest and most disturbing. Jack had left intentionally. That he had staged the scene, the coffee cup, the wallet, the keys, and walked away from his life during the only window when he could vanish without immediate detection. But this theory required believing that a man who had spent 43 years in the same house, who video called his daughter every Sunday without fail, who had built his entire identity around stability and reliability, had spontaneously decided to disappear without preparation, without money, without even a jacket. Sarah McDonald, Jack's daughter, stopped coming to the command post after day 4. Miller had seen it before, the transition from frantic hope to hollow waiting. She was at her father's house now, he'd been told, beginning the grim process of sorting through his belongings, trying to find something the professionals had missed. Some clue in his papers, his bills, his meticulously kept files. She wouldn't find anything. Miller was certain of that. They had already conducted 3 comprehensive searches of the residence. Every drawer opened, every closet examined, every piece of paper photographed and catalogued. If there had been something to find, they would have found it. The family liaison officer had prepared Sarah for the possibility that they might never have answers, that her father could become one of the thousands of people who vanish each year, leaving behind only questions and the terrible weight of not knowing. The media interest, which had spiked initially, "Man vanishes during storm," made for compelling local news, was already fading. By day 5, Jack's story had migrated from lead coverage to brief updates. Soon it would disappear from broadcasts entirely, relegated to the missing persons databases and the quarterly cold case reviews that every department conducted without real expectation of breakthrough. Miller closed the case file on his desk. The search would continue in a modified form, periodic checks of the wooded areas, alerts to neighboring jurisdictions, monitoring of John Doe reports from hospitals and morgue intakes. But the massive coordinated effort was ending. They would likely find Jack eventually. A hiker would stumble across remains in a creek bed, or a hunter would notice something wrong in a hollow between trees. The recovery would bring a kind of closure, even as it left the fundamental mystery intact. Why had he been out there at all? That evening, Miller made the decision to conduct one final walkthrough of Jack's house. The scene had been officially released back to the family, but Sarah had requested another day before she returned. The house sat empty, quiet, sealed behind yellow caution tape that no longer served any real purpose. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps just the sense that he had done everything possible, examined every angle before consigning Jack McDonald to the permanent uncertainty of an unsolved disappearance. Miller unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was exactly as they had left it 5 days earlier. The coffee cup, the wallet, the reading glasses. The silence was absolute. He moved slowly through the rooms, letting his eyes track across surfaces they had already documented a dozen times. Sometimes the answer wasn't in finding something new. Sometimes it was in understanding what you had already seen. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Miller stopped and listened. The silence of an empty house is never truly silent. Detective Miller stood motionless in the center hallway, the afternoon light slanting through the windows in dusty beams. In the absence of human activity, a house reveals its hidden life. The low hum of the refrigerator cycling on, the subtle groan of settling floorboards, the whisper of air moving through vents. Background noise that occupies the space between nothing and something. He had come for a final survey, a professional closing of the mental file before the case entered its slow fade into cold storage. But standing there, in the stillness Jack McDonald had left behind, Miller found himself doing something he rarely did in the field. He simply waited. 30 seconds, a minute. The refrigerator compressor clicked off. In the new layer of quiet, he heard it. A faint sound, rhythmic. 3 soft impacts. A pause, then 3. More. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Miller's pulse elevated instantly, his body responding before his conscious mind fully processed what he was hearing. He turned his head slowly, trying to isolate the direction. Not from the walls, not from the pipes in the ceiling, though his rational mind immediately offered that explanation. Water hammer, thermal expansion, something mechanical and meaningless. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was below him. Miller pulled his radio from his belt. His thumb hovered over the transmit button for 3 full seconds while he fought the surreal cognitive dissonance of what he was about to report. They had searched this house. K9 units had been through every room. Thermal imaging had scanned the structure from the outside. But the tapping continued, weak but deliberate. And it carried a pattern that no settling house or cooling pipe could produce. Command, this is Miller. I'm at the McDonald residence. I need a unit. Here now! He kept his voice level, professional. And get me building plans for this address. Original construction documents. Anything showing the foundation and substructure. The response came back within 20 seconds, confusion evident in the dispatcher's tone. Miller, that scene was released. What's your situation? I'm hearing sounds from beneath the structure. Even as he said it, the absurdity registered. Possible person in distress. Silence on the radio. Then, confirming, you're reporting sounds from below the residence? Correct. Units responding. ETA 4 minutes. Miller moved carefully through the house, stopping in each room to listen. The sound was most prominent in the central hallway near the linen closet. He opened the closet door, shelves neatly stacked with towels, sheets, cleaning supplies, and crouched low. There. Tap, tap, tap. Definitely beneath the floor. He pressed his palm flat against the hardwood. The vibration was barely perceptible, but present. Someone or something was striking the underside of the structure with diminishing strength. The implications assembled themselves rapidly in Miller's mind, each one more troubling than the last. If there was accessible space beneath this house, why hadn't the K9 units indicated it? If someone was down there, how had thermal imaging missed the heat signature? And the most disturbing question, if Jack McDonald was somehow below his own house, he had been there for 5 days. 5 days without water would put him at the edge of survivability. 5 days without food was manageable, but combined with dehydration, exposure, and depending on the conditions of the space, temperature, air quality, injury, the window for viable rescue was measured in hours, possibly less. The first patrol unit arrived 3 minutes later, Officer Chen entering with the heightened alertness of someone responding to a call that didn't fit standard categories. Miller briefed him in, low tones while the tapping continued its irregular pattern. We need to locate an access point, Miller said. Crawl space entrance, basement hatch, something we missed. They split up, Chen taking the exterior perimeter, while Miller focused on the interior. He moved through the house with new eyes, looking not at the surfaces but at the structure itself. Where were the seams? Where were the inconsistencies? The house was a single-story ranch built in 1978, standard concrete, slab foundation. According to the county records, no basement, no crawl space noted on the original plans. But Jack McDonald had been a carpenter for 4 decades. If anyone would know how to modify a structure, leave a hidden space, alter the original design, it would be him. Miller returned to the linen closet. The tapping had weakened, now almost imperceptible. He began removing items from the shelves, stacking towels and bedding in the hallway. The closet was deeper than it appeared from the doorway, extending back roughly 6 feet. The walls were drywall, unremarkable. The floor was the same hardwood that ran throughout the house. But when Miller pressed his weight onto different sections of the floor, testing for give or hollow sound, he found it in the back right corner, a section approximately 2 feet square that produced a subtly different acoustic response when struck. Officer Chen appeared in the doorway. No exterior access points, No vents, no hatches, nothing. But I found something weird. The back porch has a section of lattice that looks newer than the rest, and the dog was scratching at it when the neighbor found him on the property. Miller stood, mind racing. The dog got out somehow. If there's space below the house, there might be an exterior opening we're reading as decorative. 2 more units arrived, along with fire rescue. Miller directed them to the closet while he briefed Fire Captain Rodriguez. We're going to need to breach the floor. I need your assessment on how to do this without compromising anyone who might be below. Rodriguez examined the closet, tapping along the floorboards with the methodical attention of someone who understood structures. If someone's down there and conscious, we need to establish communication first. Let them know we're coming through. Prevent panic. Miller knelt at the back of the closet and spoke toward the floor, his voice firm and clear. Jack, if you can hear me, this is Detective Miller with Cedar Creek Police. We're getting you out. Make a sound if you can hear me. 5 seconds of silence. Then faintly, 3 taps. Weaker than before. The captain made a quick decision. We go through here. Controlled breach with manual tools to minimize vibration. If it's a sealed space and he's been down there 5 days, air quality is going to be a critical factor the moment we open it. The next 15 minutes moved with the controlled urgency of a technical rescue. Firefighters brought in pry, bars, a reciprocating saw, and a battery-powered fan to prepare for ventilation. Miller coordinated with EMS, who staged a stretcher and medical equipment just outside the front door. Sarah McDonald arrived as they were preparing to cut through the floor. Having been contacted immediately when the situation escalated, she stood in the doorway of her father's house, watching strangers dismantle the linen closet, her face cycling through expressions that couldn't settle on a single emotion: hope, confusion, horror at the implication of where her father had been while they searched. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. We're hearing responses, Miller told her. We're moving as fast as we can. The firefighter operating the reciprocating saw made the first cut along what they had identified as the seam. The blade bit through hardwood, then met resistance that wasn't subflooring. Metal, some kind of reinforced barrier. He built this deliberately, Rodriguez said quietly. This isn't original construction. Someone engineered this space. They switched tactics, using pry bars to leverage up the section of floor. It resisted, the fit precise and tight. On the 3rd attempt, with 2 firefighters applying force simultaneously, the section lifted with a sharp crack. The smell hit them immediately. Stale air, human waste, desperation. Below, in the beam of their flashlights, was Jack McDonald. The same day, Detective Miller stood in the silent house and heard that impossible tapping. Another impossibility occurred 3 blocks away. Carol Benning had stepped onto her back deck that afternoon to refill her bird feeder when she saw him. A brown and white Australian shepherd, sitting on the porch next door, perfectly still, watching the back door of Jack McDonald's house. She froze. She recognized the dog immediately. Buster, Jack's constant companion, the animal that had been missing for 5 days along with his owner. Carol crossed into Jack's, yard slowly, half convinced the dog was a hallucination born from days of stress and searching. But Buster was real. His fur was matted with dirt and burrs. His ribs showed through his coat. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, but he was alive. He didn't react when she approached, didn't wag his tail or turn his head, just stared at that back door with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Buster?" she said quietly. "Where have you been?" The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his name, but he didn't break his gaze from the house. Carol grabbed her phone and dialed Sarah McDonald with shaking hands. Then she called the police. Then she filled a bowl with water from Jack's outdoor spigot and set it beside the dog, who finally looked away from the door long enough to drink until the bowl was empty. When Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, she dropped to her knees on the porch and wrapped her arms around the animal, sobbing into his filthy fur. Buster allowed it, but something in his behavior struck everyone who witnessed it as profoundly wrong. He wasn't joyful or relieved. He was agitated, restless. Every few minutes he would pull away from Sarah and return to that same spot, staring at the back door as if waiting for someone. The timing was impossible to ignore. The same day Jack's location was potentially discovered inside the house, his dog reappeared outside it. Detective Miller drove over within the hour, standing in Jack's backyard while a veterinarian examined Buster on the porch. The vet confirmed what was visible: dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion. The dog had been without adequate food and water for days. But he had no injuries, no signs of being confined or restrained. He could have returned home at any point, so where had he been? Miller watched the dog, who had resumed his vigil at the back door despite Sarah's attempts to coax him toward her car. The animal's focus was absolute. He knew something, or he was waiting for something. "Has he always been this attached to the house?" Miller asked Sarah. She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "He's attached to my dad, not the house. When Dad would leave for errands, Buster would wait by the front door. Not like this." The detective pulled out his phone and called the team still working inside Jack's house. "Anyone near the back of the property? Go open the rear door. Just prop it open." Through the phone, he heard footsteps, a deadbolt turning, the creak of the door swinging wide. On the porch, 15 feet away, Buster's ears shot up. He stood, took 3 steps toward the now open door, then stopped. His whole body tensed. A low whine built in his throat, rising and falling, a sound of distress that made everyone in the yard go silent. He didn't enter. He wanted to, but he didn't. Sarah's face crumpled. "He knows. Oh God, he knows Dad's in there." Miller felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. He didn't believe in supernatural explanations, but he couldn't deny what he was watching. The dog's behavior suggested traumatic association. Buster had been inside that house recently, or near it, and something had happened that he was desperate to communicate but couldn't. The question no one could answer: if the dog had been with Jack, wherever Jack was, why didn't the K9 units detect his scent trail 5 days ago? They'd walked dogs through every room of that house, through the yard, down the street. The scent trails had ended at the curb, as if both man and animal had simply evaporated. But if Buster hadn't been with Jack, where had he been? Miller ordered the back door closed. Buster relaxed slightly, but remained standing, watchful. The detective crouched down 10 feet from the dog, studying him. Australian shepherds were intelligent, loyal, anxious without purpose. This one looked like he'd been carrying a purpose for 5 days that no one could understand. Sarah took Buster home that evening. He refused to eat. He paced her apartment for hours, whining at the door, trying to return to the place he'd just been rescued from. She called Miller at midnight, exhausted and frightened by the dog's distress. "He won't stop," she said. "It's like he's trying to tell me something and I'm too stupid to understand." Miller told her what he'd been told 2 hours earlier. They'd found the source of the tapping. They were going to open the floor in the morning. Sarah went quiet. Then, "Buster came back the same day you heard it." "I know. That's not a coincidence." "No," Miller said. "It isn't." October 18th. 6 days after Jack McDonald vanished. Morning light filtered through the windows of the quiet house on Maple Street, illuminating a scene that would have looked absurd to anyone who didn't know the context. 4 investigators and 2 structural contractors stood in a linen closet on the main floor, staring at the hardwood beneath their feet as if it might speak. Detective Miller replayed the audio, recording he'd captured the previous evening. In the confined space, The sound was clearer. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Coming from directly below this section of floor. "There's nothing on the blueprints," one contractor said, crouching to examine the boards. "Original plans from 1987 show crawl space access in the northwest corner of the basement. This area," he tapped the floor with his knuckles, "should be dead space. Maybe 18 inches of clearance between the basement ceiling and this floor." "Could someone fit in 18 inches?" Miller asked. "Fit? Maybe if they were on their stomach. Survive for 6 days?" The contractor shook his head. "I don't see how." The second contractor had been running his hands along the edges of the floorboards, pressing and probing. "These are original hardwood, oak, tongue and groove installation. But this section—" He paused, fingers tracing a seam. "These 3 boards were removed and reinstalled. See the nail pattern? New nails. They're countersunk and filled, but they're not original." Miller felt his pulse quicken. Someone modified this floor. And recently, within the last few years, I'd estimate. The implication settled over the room. Jack McDonald had built something beneath his own floor and hidden the entrance so well that even people standing on it wouldn't know it existed. The tapping wasn't coming from a crawl space. It was coming from something else. Miller made the call. "Bring in the pry bars. We're opening it." The process was painstaking. The contractors worked carefully, not wanting to damage the structure or injure anyone who might be below. They started at the edges, wedging flathead pry bars into the seams, applying gradual pressure. The first board resisted, then lifted with a sharp crack of splintering wood. The second came easier. The third revealed darkness underneath, and a smell that hit them immediately. Stale air, human waste, damp earth. Someone gagged. Miller pulled his shirt over his nose and aimed his flashlight into the widening gap. The beam illuminated rough plywood, a space barely 4 feet deep, extending beyond the reach of the light. Not a crawl space. A room, hand-built, hidden. "Jack!" Miller called into the darkness. "Jack McDonald? Can you hear me?" For 3 seconds, nothing. Then, tap, tap, tap. Frantic now. Faster. Coming from deeper within the hidden space. "He's alive," someone breathed behind Miller. The contractors abandoned caution and worked faster, prying up board after board until they'd opened a section 3 feet wide. Miller dropped to his stomach and angled his flashlight into the space below. The beam swept across plywood walls, a dirt floor, a section of collapsed insulation. And there, pressed against the far wall, approximately 8 feet from the opening, a figure. A man. Folded into a sitting position, one arm raised to shield his eyes from the sudden light. Jack McDonald. His voice came out cracked, barely audible. "Latch broke." Miller's radio crackled. Multiple voices talking over each other. Paramedics were already on scene, had been standing by since dawn. They were coming in. "Jack, we're going to get you out. Can you move toward me?" A long pause. Then Jack shifted, dragging himself forward on his elbows with excruciating slowness. His movements were weak, disoriented. He'd made it less than 2 feet when his strength gave out, and he collapsed flat against the dirt. "We're coming to you," Miller said. "Hold on." One of the contractors, the smaller of the two, stripped off his jacket and lowered himself through the opening. The space was tight enough that he had to army crawl the 8 feet to reach Jack. The rest of them could hear his voice, calm and steady, talking Jack through what was about to happen. It took 11 minutes to extract him. They had to widen the opening further, had to pass a rescue harness down and work it around Jack's unresponsive body, had to drag him across the dirt floor toward the light while he drifted in and out of consciousness. When they finally pulled him up into the linen closet, Miller got his first clear look. Jack McDonald was gray-skinned, hollow-eyed, covered in dirt and his own filth. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His hands were raw, fingernails torn, but he was breathing. He was alive. The paramedics took over immediately, starting an IV, checking vitals, loading him onto a stretcher. Jack's eyes were open but unfocused. He kept trying to say something, the same two words repeated like a prayer. Miller leaned close to hear. "Buster, where's Buster?" "Your dog's safe," Miller told him. "He came back yesterday. He's with Sarah." Something that might have been relief crossed Jack's face. Then his eyes closed and he was gone, unconscious before they'd even carried him out of the house. Miller stood alone in the linen closet, staring down into the black space they'd just opened. The smell was overwhelming now. He could see the full scope of it. A chamber approximately 12 feet long and 7 feet wide. 4 feet of vertical clearance. No light source. No ventilation. No water. No supplies of any kind except a sleeping bag in one corner and a metal bucket that had served as a toilet. A prison, built by the man who'd been trapped inside it. The flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness. 4 feet below the splintered floorboards, the light found a cramped rectangular space, 6 feet long, bare concrete walls, no windows, no ventilation. And curled against the far wall, barely able to lift his head toward the sudden brightness, was Jack MacDonald, alive and Detective Miller's radio crackled to life before he could process what he was seeing. "We need paramedics. Now. He's here. He's breathing." Jack was severely dehydrated, his lips cracked and bleeding. His voice, when he tried to speak, produced only a rasp. 5 days without water in, a sealed concrete box had pushed his body to the edge of what it could survive. The thermal drone that had scanned the property twice hadn't detected him. The insulated ceiling panel had masked his heat signature completely. The space itself appeared deliberate. Reinforced walls, sound-dampening insulation, a slide bolt latch on the inside of the heavy door panel, now bent and jammed at an angle that made opening it impossible from below. No supplies, no water, no light source. Just a man and the prison he had built with his own hands. Paramedics descended through the enlarged opening with a backboard. As they lifted Jack toward the surface, one detail stopped the assembled investigators cold. His fingertips were raw and bloodied. He had spent days clawing at that door, trying to force a latch that wouldn't budge, in darkness so complete he couldn't see his own hands. The entire search radius had covered 10 miles. He had been 3 feet beneath them the whole time. At Cedar Creek Memorial Hospital, Jack MacDonald drifted in and out of consciousness for the first 48 hours. Severe dehydration, acute kidney stress, exposure injuries. When he finally stabilized enough to speak, investigators gathered with questions that had been building for 6 days. His answers came in fragments. He remembered the storm hitting. He remembered going into the space, the door slamming shut, the latch breaking, darkness. He couldn't explain why he built the hidden cellar. Couldn't explain why it had no emergency release. Couldn't explain why he entered it during the storm without supplies, without light, without telling anyone it existed. 3 theories emerged among investigators. The secret prepper. Evidence suggested Jack had worked on the space for years, quietly, telling no one. A survivalist mindset driven by fears he never voiced. The storm triggered him to use it, and his creation became his tomb. The tragic accident. A simple storm shelter or storage, space. He went down to secure something valuable as winds reached 70 miles per hour. A pressure shift slammed the door. The latch jammed. A craftsman killed by a fatal flaw in his own design. The hiding place. He heard something before the storm hit. Used the chaos as cover to hide from a perceived human threat. This theory remained speculation, but it left one haunting question. Was he running from someone who might still be out there? Jack MacDonald died 3 weeks later from complications. The full story died with him. While searchers combed 10 miles in every direction, Jack MacDonald lay mere feet beneath their boots the entire time. His sanctuary became his tomb. The greatest mysteries hide not in dark woods, but in the spaces we create beneath our own floors, and in the silent minds of those we think we know. What secrets rest beneath your floorboards? What did Jack never tell anyone? Some questions outlive the missing themselves.